a circuit breaker, whether that will actually stop Omicron dead in its tracks. What Omicron does extremely well is cause these super spreader events where if you go into a poorly ventilated space, lots of people, heavy breathing, like a nightclub, for example. Now, I have to raise that as an issue because that's the classic place where these super spreader events take place. Other things as well. We've already had super spreader events in Scotland at weddings, where people get quite merry after the wedding and all that kind of thing. So that's what this virus specializes in. Just like the other variants, but particularly Omicron, it seems to cause more infections in a super spreader event than other variants, although the data on that is still being collected. So if you have a circuit breaker, you have to stop these public gatherings, particularly inside, particularly with poor ventilation, particularly where people are heavy breathing. The big problem there is that the government seems very reluctant to provide the financial support for the hospitality industry, which is needed. If you're going to do that, and you're going to do that quickly, you've got to have that furlough scheme brought back ASAP. And that's the dilemma for the government, well, in the sense that they're reluctant to do that. They've already spent vast sums of money on it. But unless they do that, the hospitality industry is going to be destroyed. And, with all the downsides there to employment and so on. But on the other hand, if they don't do that, then the number of cases will take off. And then maybe the health service is going to be really impacted because it's already working flat out. And any increase in the number of cases, not just of COVID, but anything else associated with COVID, is really going to put so much pressure on it. And that's why, of course, I think the Mayor of London has declared this emergency in London because they've got such a bad problem. Partly, not entirely, but partly because Londoners have been very poor at taking up the vaccine.
I wouldn't be endeavouring to do a circuit breaker or anything similar because I think all the evidence is it won't make very much difference. I mean, last year, with less transmissible variants, we had a 2-week circuit breaker here in Wales. We bought ourselves maybe 2 to 3 weeks respite, and we just kicked the main part of the curve further down into winter. That was all at a cost of about £235 million set aside from the Welsh Government's contingency fund, which, scaling up to a UK level, would be something like £5 billion. And of course, all that economic loss translates into loss of life opportunities, social well-being and health going forward. I take the point that there are locations where super spreader events can occur, like nightclubs, but in my experience, it's some decades since I've been to a nightclub, you don't get very many of the older and vulnerable people actually congregating in nightclubs. So the Welsh Government's idea that if they shut down the nightclubs, that's somehow a good thing, doesn't seem to me to be really very directly addressing the problem. I'm afraid the only way we can address the problem is by getting as many of those people who are vulnerable by virtue of their age or virtue of other things wrong with them to have either complete their vaccinations or have boosters. That way we have some chance of protecting them. And let's be clear, very few of the things that we do, including vaccination, has very much impact on the spread. The spread is with us, and I'm afraid as a result of that, if it does turn out that the serious illness results, and I agree with you, the data from South Africa gives us grounds for very cautious optimism. But if it does turn out, then the NHS will come under the sort of winter pressures that we used to see with the big flu epidemics before we were successful in getting larger sections of the population vaccinated from about 2000 onwards.